the driving force in production is the entrepreneur. Okay? And let me give you a definition of the entrepreneur. And then we'll talk about his role in more detail and about the role of profits. Now, remember, before we actually define the entrepreneur, remember that all action takes place under uncertainty. It's all aimed towards the future. In order to act successfully, people have to forecast the future. Okay, the more successful they are in forecasting the future, the more successful their actions will be. Okay, so that therefore there is always an entrepreneurial element in every action. Okay, including actions in your daily lives and actions in business. Okay, so every action has an entrepreneurial element. So when you decide on a college major, okay, you are making an entrepreneurial decision regarding what you expect the salaries to be in that major versus salaries that you're going to be earning if you took other majors. Right? Or if someone moves from the Northeast to the Southeast, thinking that the job market is better here, and gets a job, but then loses the job pretty quickly and can't find another one, that person has acted as an entrepreneur, but has made an unsuccessful decision. Turns out the costs are greater than the benefits. So everyone acts as an entrepreneur, but when economists use the term entrepreneurship, we mean something much more specific. We don't mean the laborer making decisions that are risky or the landowner making certain decisions that are risky. We mean a specific individual, the promoter entrepreneur. Now, Mises calls him the promoter entrepreneur. Rothbard calls him the capitalist entrepreneur. We'll just call him the entrepreneur, okay? But keep in mind that when we're talking about the entrepreneur, we mean this narrower conception of someone who earns his or her income from allocating production to future needs or future demands, okay? Or to put it another way, the capitalist entrepreneur is a person who attempts to take advantage of the fact that there's continual change in the economy and that resources at any given moment of time, there are resources in the economy that are undervalued, that are not being used in their highest valued use from the point of view of future consumer demand. So that person seeks to earn a living from adjusting resources, from moving them from undervalued to higher valued uses. So what is the specific function of this entrepreneur? Well, this entrepreneur determines the employment of the factors of production. Okay, with his capital and investment in various lines of production, he is making decisions how to use the scarce factors out there in the economy. Okay? And all entrepreneurs compete against one another to get control of these factors of production. And that's what determines, as we'll see in the next lecture, determines the prices, wages, rents, and so on, of the various capital goods, types of labor, and natural resources. Okay. Now, one thing to keep in mind, the entrepreneurial function, and I'll repeat this later on in more detail, is not a factor of production. The entrepreneur is not a factor of production. It's a pure decision-making function. It's a decision about how to use the factors of production. Okay? So it's an intellectual function. It's a purely intellectual function. Many books, almost all books, will say that, well, entrepreneurship is a type of labor, therefore it's a factor of production. Here's an indicator that it's not a factor of production. Every type of labor earns a positive return. We call that a wage. Okay? Every type of capital good earns a capital value or a rent if it's hired out. Every natural resource earns rent. However, an entrepreneur can either earn a positive or a negative income. He can earn a positive profit or he can lose. Okay? But no other factor of production can earn a negative income. So entrepreneurial income is something different. It's not a return to a factor of production, otherwise it would have to be positive. Okay? Since it sometimes can be negative, it's a return to a decision. If the choice is correct, or more correct than other choices being made by entrepreneurs, it's going to return something positive. If it's incorrect, then there'll be a loss. Okay. All right. Now, when we say that the entrepreneur determines or decides upon the employment of factors of production, what do we actually mean by that? It means that he determines what to produce, okay, what good to produce, exactly what qualities that good will have, where to produce it, what technology to use. There's many different ways to produce an automobile, for example, all the way from putting it together by hand, and some collectible automobiles can be built that way, or some luxury automobiles can be built that way, all the way to having a completely robotized factory, producing the car. So there's many different ways of doing it. The entrepreneur wants to choose the most cost-effective way. Now, given that he's undertaking an investment in factors of production, which have to be transformed eventually into a final consumer's good, it means that his decision, he will not know whether his decision is successful or not until some point in the future. It could be a year, it could be 5 years down the road, or even 10 years down the road. That means that entrepreneurs must anticipate future market conditions. If you want, let's say GM wants to come up to develop a new model car, the supply and demand for that car today, or that type of car today, or something similar today, is not relevant. In fact, there might not be any similar type of product today. So prices today are some kind of a guide, but what he's interested in, what he must do, is to forecast or anticipate what supply and demand conditions are going to be 5 years from now when that car comes onto the market. Okay, so he's going to have to be able to really, at least in a general level, predict or better yet, forecast what consumer value scales will be like and what competitors will be doing in the meantime. Okay. Now, what he must also do, since he has to pay his cost of production in advance, he pays the cost now, okay, or as the production process goes along, but he has to usually make a big fixed investment initially. He must compare that to estimated prices. So he must estimate what prices will be 5 years in the future, or 4 years in the future, or next month. In any case, it's the future prices of the output that are compared to the present prices or the costs of production. Okay? The present prices of the factors of production or the costs of production. Okay? So when you add up all the prices of the factors of production, those are your costs. And that involves what we might call appraisement. Okay? He must place, appraisement means placing a cardinal number, okay, a price, deriving that from people's value scales, from available resources, and so on. And that's what the market does. The market continually generates, based on people's value scales, cardinal prices that can be used to calculate profits and losses. So the entrepreneur, knowing all of this qualitative information, that's not enough. Okay, he can know what demand's going to be in the future. He can know what supplies will be. He still has to have some cardinal number. He has to arrive at some cardinal number that he can compare to his cost of production. Okay. And he can be better or worse at forecasting future market conditions and appraising future market prices. If he's worse at it, he's going to lose money. If he's better at it than other entrepreneurs, no one's perfect at it, by the way. By the way, if every entrepreneur, let's get this straight now. If every entrepreneur knew perfectly what the prices of every good would be in the future, okay, what would happen to the prices of the factors of production today? If, for example, everybody knew that a certain type of automobile would sell for $30,000 in 2 years, what would the prices or the costs of producing that good be today? Well, everybody would rush in, and they'd be willing to bid up to how much for the factors of production? Up to $30,000, minus the rate of interest over 2 years, okay? Because they're not getting paid for 2 years, so there's a time preference factor here, and that's reflecting the rate of interest. So it's the same as if I held up a $20 bill. If I held up a $20 bill right now, and I ask you, I'll sell it to the highest bidder, okay? Well, you're the entrepreneurs out there. The $20 bill is what you see in the future. Okay? If everyone perfectly knew, if you trusted me, for example, if you didn't realize I was from New Jersey and my last name ended with a vowel, okay, you trusted me that I would give you the $20 bill. What would you bid for that $20 bill? What would you predict right now would be the final bid? Very, very, very close to $20, okay? The person who would put the least amount of value on their time and effort of getting up out of their seat and coming up here might be $19.50, $19.75, whatever it would be, okay? Well, that's what would happen. That's called the evenly rotating economy. we'll talk a little bit more why that's an important, though very unrealistic and, in fact, unrealizable construct. Okay? We do assume sometimes that producers know, for certain problems in economics, producers know exactly what prices will be in the future. Okay? What that allows us to do is to show a world in which there's no uncertainty. And in that world, there is no profits. That's what I was getting at. Because every entrepreneur will bid, they'll all bid against one another, and they'll bid the prices of the cost of the factors of production up to the level of the future prices, minus the interest rate. Okay? So, what that allows us to do, this construct which we call the evenly rotating economy, in which people's value scales are constant, resources are constant, and technology never changes, that allows us to separate two types of return that entrepreneurs tend to get. Their return as capitalists who advance their money now, and which is based on time preference, and their return as entrepreneurs who are operating under uncertainty. Right? So we look at a world where there's no change, and we find that there are no profits, which then tells us, we can deduce from that in fact, profits come from uncertainty. They come from forecasting continual changes in supply and demand, okay, and being more right than other entrepreneurs in doing that. Okay. A few other things about entrepreneurs. Actually, let me use an example. When Steve Jobs, who was one of the founders of Apple, when he began to make investments to bring this product to market, there were no personal computers on the market, or no small computers on the market that he could look to for prices. He had to appraise that future price of what this Mac, for example, would sell for, based on his experience of the past, based on hunches about how businesses will react to a small computer, and so on. And he did so in a way that was successful, okay, at least initially. Okay. Also, the entrepreneurial role implies that the person owns some capital. Okay, you know, it's not just a good idea. A lot of people have good ideas. Okay, you either have to have the capital necessary to put that idea into effect, or you have to go convince someone else that you have a good idea and get capital from that person. But usually, in order to get backing, to get outside financial backing, you yourself need to put up some resources. Okay, you yourself have to risk something. Okay? So, for the most part, entrepreneurs are also capitalists. That's why we call them capitalist entrepreneurs. Okay. Also, remember, since all production is for the future, and you're paying the factors of production, land, labor, natural resources, in advance, okay, if you turn out to be wrong, you're the one who bears the sole loss. Okay? That is, you've already paid the costs. So think of it this way. When GM lost $10.6 billion last year, and we brought this up, how much did the workers lose in producing the cars that were sold below cost? They lost nothing. They were paid in advance. They were paid every 2 weeks before the cars were actually produced. Now, as a result of those bad decisions, some of those workers may lose their jobs. But that has nothing to do with them getting paid for producing the goods that lost money. The entrepreneur bears the sole risk in production. And for the same reason, he gets whatever's left over after he has paid the factors of production. So he bears the sole risk. That is, sometimes he's called the residual claimant. He gets what's left over after all the factors have been paid. Yes?
Marx is like, I was reading I think Marx is counter to von Bauberg's idea, which he's discussing. And he said basically that, as he said, the laborers are exploited in the end because they get fired if any mishaps go along as far as a calculation, right, if the entrepreneur gets lost. But that doesn't account for the labor they've already made, that they already got paid for. So it's not, they're not losing any money because they labored and didn't get paid. They got paid already. Right. So it's not exploitation. Right.
The laborer may lose his or her job as a result of bad decisions by the entrepreneur. But the point is, during that production process, the laborer got paid what he or she contributed to production. Okay. Now, by the way, when the laborer gets laid off, the laborer is pretty non-specific. The laborer can find another job, but the entrepreneur, and I'm not saying you should feel sorry for entrepreneurs that lose money. They've wasted scarce resources. They produced the wrong things. But when they lose money, they've lost their capital, okay, and they've lost their reputation, okay. That is, it's going to be much more difficult to raise additional capital for another venture. Okay. All right. Now, let's just talk a little bit about the entrepreneur and the manager, because sometimes, especially in modern economy, it's difficult to pinpoint who the entrepreneur actually is, okay? Or who the decision maker actually is. So let's look at the managerial function. Remember, the entrepreneur determines a general plan for the factors of production. But he knows that over time things may change, okay? And that, especially if it's a big firm that he creates, he can't take Bill Gates. He can't be everywhere to make small adjustments to these changes. So he hires managers. And managers are basically junior partners of the entrepreneur. Okay. In one way, they operate like entrepreneurs, but another very important way, they could never be called the entrepreneur. They may actually make day-to-day decisions, okay, day-to-day decisions about how the firm's operating. Okay. How does the entrepreneur oversee those decisions? Well, because of accounting, double entry bookkeeping accounting, or double entry accounting, the entrepreneur can evaluate the performance of every department, every division, okay, and the supervisors and so on. He can evaluate the manager's performance. And one way to motivate the managers is to make them part or people who share in the profits by giving them bonuses. That is, you can make their salary to some extent depend on bonuses, or by paying them partly in shares of stock. Okay, so the better they perform, the higher their bonuses are. However, why does this not supplant the entrepreneurial role? The worst that can happen to the managers is they don't get a bonus. They still get a salary. They still get paid. They can be fired. What can't happen to the manager that can happen to the entrepreneur? Right. They can never lose money. They can never lose capital. Okay. They can participate in the profits, but they can't lose money. So it's sort of like the following example. Let's say, well, actually, let me get to someone who sort of criticizes this view, John Kenneth Galbraith, the left-wing economist, the late John Kenneth Galbraith, who just recently passed away in his 90s. He coined a term back in the 70s called the technocracy, meaning the scientists, engineers, and managers that sort of got together and wrested control of the firm effectively away from the stockholders and the entrepreneurs. And he claimed they ran it for their own benefit. Okay. And yes, they would just try to earn a small profit, as if it's easy to earn a profit of any size. They would earn a small profit to keep the stockholders happy, the entrepreneur investors happy, but they really control the firm for their own benefit. There's a number of things wrong with that. First of all, let me just give you an example that Murray Rothbard used to use, and that is, let's say, one of the Rockefellers, works in New York, and on weekends or a couple times a month goes up to his estate in upstate New York, okay? And he hires a head gardener or head landscaper who is in charge of landscaping the entire estate. Now, if you or I are observing this, we think this guy's completely in charge of everything. He's determining what sort of shrubbery to put in, what sort of grass to use, and so on. He's laying out the whole design of the estate, okay? So is he? It seems as if he controls it, but is he the ultimate decision maker? Of course not. One day, Rockefeller could come up there and say, "This is terrible. You're fired," and just get someone else. Okay? And there's similar mechanisms that operate in the modern corporate firm. Okay? For example, you have a board of directors that can fire the managers. Okay? They represent the interests of the stockholders. Okay? Yes, it's true the individual stockholders, though that's not true of the larger ones, but these small individual stockholders have really no knowledge of what's going on from day to day. Nor do they have any sort of an incentive to collect all that information, because it's very costly to collect that information if they think there's something wrong. Okay? It's very difficult to organize all these small stockholders. But there are some large stockholders that will always be looking over the shoulder of the managers. Okay? If they don't like something, especially if one of them sits on the board of directors, they can have them fired. There's also proxy fights where large stockholders will call for a vote on the board of directors, and they'll collect votes, proxies from smaller stockholders, and you can throw them out, the managers out that way. Fire the board of directors, put in new directors and new managers. But there's a way that even small stockholders can have a direct effect on the firm, on the policies that the managers are following if they don't like them. And that is simply voting with your feet. You can sell your stock. So if you think that the firm isn't performing very well, there'll be a mass movement of sales of stock on the stock market. So if the market, the total price of the firm on the stock market, okay, something like $8 billion, okay, and suddenly people become dissatisfied with the way the firm is being operated, and they start selling their stock. Price of stock falls, so the firm's value falls. Let's say it falls by 25% to $6 billion. That opens up the firm to a hostile takeover. Someone says, you know what? With the resources that that firm controls, with the factors of production that are in effect that firm, I can buy it at $6 billion, and I believe I can increase profits in that firm to such an extent that stocks will rise by, let's say, 50%, and the value of the firm will be $9 billion. So that person will then launch a hostile takeover, and in the process, benefiting the remaining stockholders by bidding the prices up. So maybe he'll get the firm at $7 billion, bid the prices up, offer $7 billion for it, and then increase the profits, and as a result, bring about an increase in value. So let's say $9 billion. So that person would then earn a huge profit. This is called the market for corporate control. It happens all the time. When some firms merge with other firms, okay, they may do it, in a way that's hostile. It might be a hostile takeover. Unfortunately, the Congress made it much harder to have hostile takeovers back in the 1960s. The Harrison Act. I don't know what the full name of that act is, but Senator Harrison was a crooked senator from New Jersey who got caught in an Arab scam. Remember that scam where they had FBI agents dressed up as Arabs bribing some congressmen and senators. Okay, so he was caught up in that. But anyway, the law that was passed really benefited the managers, intended to entrench them more. And basically what it said was that you can't just go in and buy up the firm, buy up the stock, and take over the firm. You have to give notice that you're doing that. There's a certain waiting period. You can buy 10% of the stock after a certain period. So during that time, the managers know they have time to sort of get their house in order. Okay? So if you got rid of that, the market would operate even much more efficiently, and these managers would be very, very frightened of running the firm in a way that benefits themselves. Now remember, there are incentives to do that, right? Raising costs lowers the profits that that stockholders get, but benefits the managers. Because look, the managers would like to have a private Learjet at their disposal. They would like to have a chauffeur-driven limo, not just for themselves, but to bring their children to school. They would like to have access to expensive country clubs. They would like to hire 2 pretty secretaries instead of 1 efficient secretary. They would like to have very high-piled carpeting, okay, and expensive art on the walls. What's to prevent them from doing all those things and raising costs? Okay, and lowering profit. That's called the that's an agency problem. Okay, where your agent is acting against your interests. Okay, yes, Mila.
Just in relation to all this, proxy fights are usually ineffective, for the most part.
Right.
That's why hostile takeovers are really important.
Yeah, hostile takeovers are important. They're the most important. I mean, it's proxy fights. I don't hear much about them anymore.
Most of the time.
Yeah. Board of directors have become more vigilant over managers in the last decade or so. So that's become more effective. But you're right. You have to keep the market open. Okay. Proxy fights aren't as effective as hostile takeovers. Yes.
So are lots of the recent corporate scandals perhaps an effect of the lack of hostile takeovers? Like
Yeah, it contributes. I would say this: laws inhibiting hostile takeovers contribute to corporate scandals. Yes. It was interesting in the 1980s when we began to have this phenomenon of hostile takeovers. People were writing letters to the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and so on, saying things like, "This is a horrible thing. It's forcing American business to focus on short-term profits and short-term movements in the stock market, whereas Japanese managers can take the long-term view." Who are signing these letters? The existing managers of American firms that were targets for takeovers, the inefficient managers. The stock market represents what people think today, of the stream of profits in the future from the current managers. Okay, so it does reflect the long term. Okay, no one knows the long term for sure. So it reflects what people think of how that firm is being managed for now and for the long term, because the stream of profit is discounted into the price of the stock is a discounted stream of the firm's earnings. Okay, all right. Let's talk a little bit about profit and loss because I've been using the term. And let me give you a very simple example. Okay, profit, which will represent as pi, is always equal to total revenue, okay, the number of units sold times the price per unit, minus total cost. Now, there's two different ways of defining cost. Okay, accountants define cost differently than economists do. So let me give you an example here. Let's say you have a small firm. It's a landscaping firm, and it's owned by a single individual. And in a given year, it returns $140,000 in monetary revenue, and the money costs that are laid out are $100,000. Okay. So the accountant, forgetting about depreciation, the accountant would figure the net earnings or the profit of the firm at $40,000. That would be the accounting profit. The economist, however, would want to know more. The economist would want to know, has the owner contributed any resources to the firm that he himself owns? And if he has, they must have an imputed or implicit price assigned to them, because they have an opportunity cost. They could be used in other lines of production on the market. So let's say that the owner manages the firm himself, and let's then say, we then have to ask the question, what's the value of his managerial labor for the year? Well, it's the opportunity cost of that labor. He could, let's say, go to work for another small firm as a manager at $50,000. Okay, that's the going rate. Right? So let's say that what we call his implicit wages. Okay, so implicit salary, or whatever you want to call it, salary. Okay, that's $50,000. Am I off? Yeah, I am. Let me do it over here. So, implicit wages, let's say, 50,000. Okay. He also owns, let's say, a dump truck that he uses in the landscaping business, and that also has to have an opportunity cost, and that also has to be accounted for. And let's say he could lease that out, so there's an implicit rent. He could lease it out for $5,000. Okay, so there's implicit rent. So that resource that he contributes is worth $5,000. And finally, let's assume that he finances the business himself. That is, he pays he has $100,000 of capital himself. He doesn't have to borrow. But yet, there is an opportunity cost of the capital invested, and that is what he could have earned, let's say, on a risk-free certificate of deposit. So let's say, for simplicity, he could have earned, let's see, how much do I figure here? Let's make it simple. He could have earned 10%. So that's $10,000 of foregone interest. Okay, so that's implicit or foregone interest. Okay, now, adding that into the out-of-pocket costs, that's another $65,000 of implicit costs that represent the opportunity costs of the resources that he contributes to the firm. So an economist would calculate profit, total cost $165,000, total revenue $140,000, as equal to negative $25,000. He's actually lost money. Now, is that meaningful? People will often say, well, that's not, he didn't really lose that. Well, yeah, he did, in a meaningful sense, in a sense that affects his actions. That is, if he had to do over again, what he would have done was this. He would have gone to work for another firm for $50,000. He would have leased his truck out to someone else for $5,000. And he would have left his money in the certificate of deposit at 10%. At the end of the year, he would have had his full $100,000 in principal, and he would have had $65,000 in income from the resources that he owned. He would have had, in effect, what? $165,000. So, he has lost money. He has not earned any sort of pure profit. Now, what if instead of total revenue being $140,000, it was $165,000? Then we would say that he earned a normal rate of return on all his resources, including his capital. But he did not earn any what? Did not earn any profit. Even though he earned $10,000 on the $100,000 investment, that's an interest return. Okay? That's the result of time preference. He hasn't earned anything here. There's no extra revenue left over that would indicate that he has moved lower valued resources to higher valued uses. Okay? Which is, now, the ultimate source of, now, if it was more, if he earned $200,000, then the $35,000 over and above all implicit costs and the capital that he invested, that would be pure profit. Yes?
You said that about Allison too much. You used to say it would have grown the truck.
No, I'm just hypothetically saying, let's say he owns a truck. To the extent that people own resources, including their own labor and capital that they contribute, what I'm saying is that you cannot just look at the out-of-pocket costs. You have to look at the value of all resources used. Okay? Let me, I have I think a very good example of how, or the social function of, and the source of profit. Okay, now, very quickly, the source of profit is the fact that some of these resources are being used in lower valued uses from the point of view of consumers. Okay? So if he earns $200,000, then what he's done is taken resources worth $165,000 and found a better use for them. He's bid against other entrepreneurs for these various things, for the labor, for the tools that are used in his operations, for the gasoline and so on, and he's moved them to maybe he's got a different idea about how to landscape, and so he's put this idea into effect, and it's more valuable to consumers. If he hadn't stepped in, resources would have been wasted. And so that's the social function of profit. And the example I want to give you, I have it here, yeah. It's actually a marvelous example of a great entrepreneur, or a stroke of entrepreneurial genius by this woman that used to work for IBM. Now, this was a woman, her name is Tamima Edmark, okay, who invented something that allowed women to, I guess, braid their hair or make ponytails and so on. It was called Topsy Tail, okay. It's a very simple implement. She became a millionaire as a result of it. So let me read you a little bit of this article. And it starts, it was August of 1989, and Tamima Edmark was a Dallas-based IBM mainframe saleswoman. Good thing she got out of that. And she thought her long blonde ponytail looked a little drab. Edmark found she could braid her ponytail by using a makeshift device consisting of a plastic loop, okay, and a knitting needle, okay. Figuring she was onto something with her hair gadget, Edmark, then 32, plunked down $5,000 to patent what she called Topsy Tail. Okay. She then she called on a company in New Jersey, and a couple of companies in New Jersey to help her make and market this product. They turned her down. Okay. So she decided to make it herself. She paying for a mold with $9,000 in savings. She was still working for IBM at the time. She found a plastics maker who would produce as many Topsy Tails as she needed for about 50 cents a piece. Okay, so they're at about 50 cents a piece, plus you have to, allocate some of the overhead, $9,000 in mold to that. So she's making them for 60, 70 cents a piece, whatever it was. Then she started advertising in a small hairstyling magazine. The first ad, which was in April 1991, brought in orders worth $1,000. Okay, and she would fill them herself, stuffing these topsy-tail things into envelopes at home at night after work. By the end of 1991, she was moving 200 units a month at $10 each. Okay, they're costing her 60, 70 cents. She's selling them at $10 each now. While in New York on IBM Business, she persuaded Glamour magazine editor, it's a big woman's fashion magazine, her name was, the editor was named Melissa Fedor, to try Topsy-Tail. Okay, within 3 weeks, it was then featured in the February 1992 issue. Within 3 weeks, Edmark had $100,000 worth of orders and had to enlist her cleaning lady to help her stuff 400 envelopes each week. She got a big break, however, when IBM fired her, okay, along with 3/4 of their Dallas mainframe sales office. Okay, she had a $25,000 early retirement package, and she lived off this money while she began hawking her product to retailers. She had gone to trade shows and hair salons, but that was small time. Okay, she had her own promotional video. But she did find out that the sales dramatically increased whenever women saw how easy the plastic device was to use. Okay, so she wanted to make a television commercial. Okay, after several false starts, she found a small TV products firm in New Jersey that promoted things like kitchen gadgets and sunglasses. Okay. The company agreed to put together a 2-minute commercial, manage Topsy-Tail's television marketing and print advertising and retail distribution. So the company was going to do all that. All Edmark had to do was appear in the commercial and sell them enough product at a price reputed to be about $1 a piece to meet the demand. So her cost was $1, and so that's what she was going to do. So the strategy worked. On her own, Edmark had sold 250,000 Topsy-Tails at $10 a piece in 20 months. Okay. Remember, that was costing her less than $1, so she's already making a lot of money. In the first 6 months after her commercial hit the networks, in December 1992, she sold 3.6 million at about $15. Okay, and let's see what her costs were. The costs were down to 22 cents, and she sold them at $15 a piece. Okay, 3.6 million. You do the math. She's a multimillionaire. Okay, what did she do? She took a piece of plastic and a knitting needle that was worth 22 cents in other functions that entrepreneurs are only willing to pay 22 cents for, consumers in general, and she combined them in a new way and turned them into something that was worth to consumers $15. Okay, that's the entrepreneurial profit right there. Okay, she paid what other entrepreneurs were paying. She didn't lowball anybody. She went out and bought what these factors of production, combined them in a different way according to a different idea, and sold them for a price much above the per unit cost. Okay, that's where her profit came from. Okay, that's where all profits come from. That's just an extreme example, which I think is a very good example. Profits come from continually readjusting production, using factors of production in new and novel ways. And they can be the same factors. You don't have to have the new technology. She didn't have any new technology. Okay? It was just a new idea about how to combine these factors. So to continually adjust production to forecast changes in consumer demand. She had a forecast that there were many women out there that were like her and that wanted something very quick in the morning, working women that would enable them to do their hair in a way that was simple, quick, but looked good. And she was right. Yes?
Concerning the landscape example, let's say that's like year one, right?
Right.
So in year one, he made an incorrect entrepreneurial decision as far as year one concerned, because he could put his resources into more profitable uses. But what if at year two, year three, the total revenue starts increasing beyond the initial total cost? So you could say during that time he made correct entrepreneurial decisions.
Right. The question is, what would happen if the person lost money in the first year, and many startup businesses do lose money in the first couple of years, but then his business caught on and he began to earn pure profits after that? Well, that's just the cost of doing business. He forecast that eventually it's going to take a while before his reputation is built up and that therefore he will earn entrepreneurial profits. So he forecast correctly. Let me just end with this example. I'll take some questions. Not examples, well, real-world examples. Does anyone remember the Blair Witch Project? Yeah. That movie? That was made for $40,000. And it's, let's see, the total revenue that it generated was, do I have that here? I have the figures for it somewhere. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, it was made for $60,000. It generated $50 million worth of revenues. Okay, the people who made it hired unknown actors. They used a very cheap setting in Maryland. Okay, and they used a technique, these shaky handheld cameras that were cheap but worked very well for the movie. And now that there was a couple millions more spent on advertising they got some firm to advertise for them, but they still made millions and millions of dollars. The other example I wanted to give is The Passion of Christ, which was a picture made by Mel Gibson that people claimed, it's not going to make any money. There was huge criticisms of it. He made it for $40 million. I saw him on, I think he said 40, maybe it would come to a little bit more than that. And worldwide, it garnered $500 million in revenues. Okay. So, did he exploit anybody? No, he simply took resources that anybody could have purchased, cameras and actors and so on, and combined them in a different way, in a way that better satisfied consumer wants than anything else that was out there at the time. Now, somebody could have come out with there's probably even a better movie that somebody could have made that would have attracted people away from his movie. But the point is that the world isn't perfect. People are making mistakes. As long as you're better than the other entrepreneurs, you're going to earn profit. Okay. I'll stop here. There's a few other things I'll say in the next lecture about this.